In this lesson, we're going to set up our 3D space to create our seamless textures. Alright, so over the last several lessons, we have taken the scenario that we were going out with our own camera and taking raw images, and then we were bringing them into Photoshop to adjust them and make the tweaks that we need to create seamless textures. Now we're in the scenario that we can't readily go out with our camera and take pictures or images of specific textures, simply because maybe these textures that we have in mind don't actually exist anywhere. And what we want to do is we want to take the scenario that we want to come into 3D and we want to create our own custom textures. So in order to begin that process, we need to set up our 3D environment to help us or aid us in that process. So to get started with this, let's go ahead and set up our home grid here. So to go to the home grid settings, we need to right click on our snap toggles and you'll bring up grid and snap settings. Now in here you're going to see home grid. Let's go ahead and choose that and you'll see that we have these grid dimensions. Now whenever we are working with textures for games, we're going to hear some dimensions over and over again, and this is going to be things like 128, 256, 512, 1024, and even 2048. Now as we get a little bit further along into the next gen game era, from the current gen, we might even see texture dimensions even higher than that. So what the main theme is we're sticking to what's called a power of 2. And this helps with game memory. Now the power of 2 is going to be 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024. You're kind of seeing a pattern here. So what we want to do is we want to set up our grid spacing to help us with that. Now we want to set this up in such a way that it's workable, okay, to where I can actually come in here and actually work in my environment. So my grid spacing, I'm going to set this up to 16. So every grid space is going to be 16 units. Now I want to set up my lines, or my grid lines here, to be at every 8. So if I set this up to 8, and then also the perspective view grid up to 8, what this is going to do for me is create 8 different grids here, and they're all at 16 units, I should say. So what that means is I have 8 of these grid lines at 16. That's going to give me 128 by 128. So this entire grid space is actually 256 by 256. So we have 16 units going across this way, and if you multiply that by 16, you'll get 256. Alright, so now let's go ahead and create our construction plane. So we have our grid here, and we're going to turn on our snap toggle settings here, and we're going to grab a plane and we're going to drag this out from one corner to the other. Alright, so right here in our perspective view, let's just create a plane. There we go. And this plane is going to kind of be a visual guide for us whenever we create all of our different tiles or blocks in here. It's going to give us a representation of how to tile all of these different objects. Alright, so now that we have that built, let's go ahead and build our different blocks that we're going to use to create our tileable texture. So let's turn off plane just by right clicking, and let's come in here to our box and let's create a few different blocks here. So I'm going to go to my top view. I'm going to hit T on the keyboard to do that. And let's just drag out a couple of shapes here. So I'm going to do a 4 by 4, and you'll see that in our length, width, and height, that's going to be 64 by 64 by 16. Let's create another block, and let's actually do a 2 by 2. And we're going to do that as 16 as well. So that's going to be 32, 32, and 16. Let's create some other blocks. Let's make them a little bit longer. So let's do a 2 by 3. Let's do a 2 by 4. Alright. And that should be good enough for us right now. And let's go ahead and go a little bit larger. So let's do a 2 by 3 here. Now we've already done a 2 by 3. Okay, but what I want to do is add just a little bit more to it. And actually let's go 2 by 4. And then we'll go by 16 here. Let's modify this block. So to do this, let's right click, convert to editable poly, Let's go to edge mode. I'm going to select all of the edges along the center here. If you need to hit F4 to turn off or turn on edge faces, you can do so. I'm going to go to my perspective view so I can see this a little bit easier. And I'm also going to turn off realistic. Let's just go to shaded. Now with these edges selected, let's hit connect, settings, and we're going to set that to 1 and hit OK. Now that's cut that block in half. Let's go to polygon mode by hitting 4 on the keyboard and selecting this polygon here, and let's extrude that out, and let's extrude it out by 32 and hit OK. So now we've created kind of a block that's kind of this L shape. Now we could create some other blocks in here as well. So let's go to our create panel and box. Let's create a 3 by, let's go 3 by 5. Let's get one that's pretty odd. And we want to go to 16 on that. So we're going to do 80 by 48 by 16. And you could create as many blocks as you want. Now this is a good starting place for these blocks here. One thing that I do want to take a look at very quickly is just making sure that this is going to be filled up the entire way. So we're looking at 6 different blocks here, and I think that we can mix and match these different blocks pretty well. Now it looks like we're at 2 by 4. Let's do one. Let's go ahead and do a 2 by 6 just in case. So that's going to be 32, 96, and 16. So that should give us plenty of room to work here. Now what I want to do at this point is select all of these different boxes. And let's grab our move tool and just move those off to the right, off of our construction plane, because what I want to do is I want to copy these individual blocks as I bring them onto this construction plane. Now that we have these different blocks here, I want to talk about a couple of things really quickly that have to do with the pivot points of these different blocks. First thing that you'll notice is that this block right here, okay, we want it to snap properly, and we want the pivot point to be right on a line. As you can see here along the y-axis, you can see that it is snapping directly on this line. Let's go to a block that has 3 sides to it, or 3 different units across. So as you can see right here, this block is having a hard time snapping in the proper place. As you can see, the Y is splitting this grid space in half, and we don't want that. So a way that we can ensure that this block is going to snap perfectly to a grid point is by changing its pivot point. So to do this, I'm going to go to my hierarchy panel, and I'm going to do pivot point. Okay, and let's grab this pivot point and let's snap it to that corner. Now once we've turned off the effect pivot point, that pivot point is going to stay on that corner. So now this block is going to snap perfectly on those lines. Let's check this one. This one's pretty good. Okay, I don't think we have any issues with it. Okay, no, that's doing well. Let's check this one here. Let's make sure that it snaps properly and it's looking good. So 2 by 6. So any of these that have an odd number, like this one here, this one would be okay because it would snap right here, but I would feel a little more comfortable if I just placed it on the corner. So I'm going to do effect pivot only and snap that right to that corner there. Now actually let's hit Control Z one time. Let's adjust its pivot point really quickly. Let's make sure it's snapped to the grid. And you'll see that we are at we have a little bit of a problem here. So this is right in the middle, and I'm just trying to take a look at this. Let's go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees. Now before we do that, let's turn on a rotate snap. Let's rotate that 90 degrees, and now let's change its pivot point. So you'll see that it's not lining up properly. So let's go to effect pivot only. Let's align to this object, and let's do maximum. There we go. And then also in its X and Y position. So that should work there. Let's hit OK. And now this is going to snap properly. Whoop. Let's turn off effect pivot only, and this should snap properly now. So we should have no issues whatsoever with this. Okay, just checking all of these. So the main thing that I want you to take from this is if there's a block that has an odd number of grids, we want to change its pivot point to one of the corners, just to ensure that it's going to snap quickly. Alright, so now that we have all these blocks set up, in our next lesson we're going to come in and we're going to start to place these blocks along our seam of our construction plane here. Alright, so I'll see you in the next lesson.